Support for the podcast comes from Philadelphia Integrative Psychiatry, a practice in Devon, Pennsylvania that combines multiple psychological and medical disciplines to build a truly holistic, individualized model of comprehensive integrative care. By providing all of their services under one roof, they aim to bridge a gap in mental health treatment. Their marriage between mental health and physical health helps to identify core sources of distress for their patients, be it psychological, medical, or a combination of both. Their team of mental health professionals and nutritionists have varying backgrounds, education, and emphases. They truly have someone for everyone. Learn more at phillyintegrative.com. Hello, and welcome back to Parenting Stuff I Wish I Knew Sooner and Want You to Know Now. I'm your host, Erica Desper, founder of the Center for Confident Parenting and a mom who seemed to learn everything I needed to know the hard way. My guest today is Rebecca Robbins, a speech-language pathologist who has spent the bulk of her career helping children, young adults, and families living with autism. She's the proud owner of MindShaper, SLP, LLC, that's a tongue tie, where she provides programs and services for autistic individuals and their families. Services provided through MindShaper, SLP, LLC include speech therapy, executive function coaching, and her proprietary social group program called the Buddy Group. Rebecca is proud to offer these services to autistic individuals across their lifespan so all of her clients can lead fruitful and fulfilling lives, no matter their age or abilities. I'm not done yet. I'm still introducing you, Rebecca. Rebecca has always loved training parents and other professionals and passionately believes that the more training and education the support people in an autistic person's life have, the more they can foster an environment that will help that person blossom into their full potential. That's why she strives every day to help make this world a better place for all autistic individuals and their families by offering parent and professional consultation services and online workshops like the Motivation Map Workshop Series, which I just attended, so that more people can feel empowered to help the autistic loved ones in their life thrive. Rebecca, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Erica.
Yeah, and I loved your Motivation Map Workshop Series. I encourage everyone to check it out. We can talk about that at the end. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to working with autistic individuals.
Well, working with autistic individuals kind of found me. The universe says here, this is for you.
That is how it often happens, right?
Yeah. So, like you said, I'm a speech language pathologist. I lived in New York for many, many years, and then I moved in the Hudson Valley, New York, but I still have an in-person component in that area, offering my Buddy Group program. But I moved to the greater Philly area in August of 2020 to be with my now husband. So now I live in PA. And by day, I'm a speech pathologist. By night, I'm an actress. I like to perform in local productions. I'm actually performing in one right now, and this is being recorded in Phoenixville. And when I was growing up, all I wanted to be was an actress. But I knew when I went to college that I wanted my college degree to be in something that I was guaranteed to make money in. Mm-hmm. So when I went to the local community, my parents were very happy about that choice. Yes. When I went to, so excuse my voice too, is a little raspy from my production that I'm in right now.
She's not trying to be sultry. She's in a performance.
Yeah, the speech pathologist who has overused their voice.
Right.
So when I went to community college, I was a liberal arts major to kind of sample all different subjects. And I took a class called the Speaking Voice. And in that class, we studied the phonetic alphabet. And when all of the other students in the class were like moaning and groaning, I was like, ooh, this is great. I love the phonetic alphabet. And that's kind of when I learned about the field of speech pathology. And at the same time, my nephew, who is now in his 20s, was in the just entering the early intervention system and was not speaking. He was almost 3 and still not talking. And so it was like a perfect storm. I knew that when our family would hear him talk for the first time, how much it would mean to us. So I knew that if I went into the field of speech pathology and could do that for just one other family, then my life will have meant something. So that's how I ended up going to become a speech pathologist. And then when it came time for me to do my clinical hours and my student teaching, I was fortunate enough to be placed at a school. It was called the Children's Annex. At that time, it's now called the Center for Spectrum Services, which was a school specifically for autistic children.
Mm.
And it was just a perfect fit. And I absolutely adored it. I loved it. And then that was it. I ended up starting my career at that school. And then even when I went into agency work and was doing early intervention in preschool, I still found myself on a lot of cases that were for autistic children. And then when I started working at the public school, I was working specifically with a life skills classroom. That was the main part of my job that had a high population of autistic children as well. So it's just been the focus of my career. And it's just been a great fit for me. I absolutely love working with this population. And in August of 2019, I decided to put all my chips in on myself. And I resigned from my job at the school district and started Mindshaper SLP had already been established. And I was working it part-time, but I decided to go full-time with my business. And I've been doing that since August of 2019. And I couldn't be happier.
Well, congratulations. I think most of
Thank
us,
you.
or maybe even all of us that have been on here, that's our things kind of found us either through our own personal struggles or just something we discovered, a passion for. So that's a great, beautiful story.
Thank you.
So, as the parent of a neurodivergent child, and for any listeners that are new, my teenage son has diagnoses of autism and ADHD and multiple other things. I can attest to the fact that two of the biggest challenges we face that tend to pervade all of our daily activities is a lack of motivation and at least some measure of dependence on me or someone else to initiate, sustain, complete tasks, especially if we're talking about non-preferred tasks. He does not need my help to initiate a video game and get through his video game turn, of course. So can we walk through some common scenarios that parents find challenging, and then you share whatever it is, a strategy, the language that can bring us like a better outcome. I mean, even getting out of bed to start each day is a challenge that we are typically frustrated from the
Right.
get-go, which does not bode well for either of us from the beginning of the day.
Yeah. Well, that's a very loaded question.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's very multifaceted. And, you know, when a child is experiencing a lack of motivation, and you hit the nail on the head that like he's very motivated to play his video games or he's very motivated to do this. And you hear parents all the time say, oh, my child isn't motivated by anything. That's false. Yes, they are. It's just they're not motivated for the things that maybe you want them to be motivated for.
Right. Right.
So the other thing that I just want to point out about motivation is that there are two different kinds of motivation or two different ways of eliciting motivation, so to speak. So there's extrinsic or external motivation, and there's internal or intrinsic. So what we all really hope for our children to have towards the tasks or the skills that we're trying to teach them is internal motivation. We want them to want to do it and to be lit up by it. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. But I do have some tips and tricks as to how you can facilitate that motivation. And especially with the autism population, historically, people have been trained to use external motivation to create that motivation in children. And that comes in the form of rewards. We call them reinforcers. And they can have their place, but the problem with using that type of motivation is it can fade over time. Your child's like what your child finds motivating at one point in time, it might lose its potency. And then all of a sudden novelty wears off. Exactly. You have to withhold your child's favorite things and use them as rewards in order to really capitalize on external motivation. And when we listen to the autistic population, the adult autistic population, many of them speak about how harmful those types of strategies have been for them. And the other problem in the long term is that a person can become dependent upon them. And I see this with some of my adult clients where they their parents have a very hard time internally motivating them to do things because they've been conditioned that, sorry if you heard that little chime.
Oh, that's
Um,
okay.
they've been conditioned to, if I do something, I'll only do something if I get a reward.
Right. What's in it
And
for
so
me?
that's hard to fade over time when you want your child to grow up to be an independent adult.
Right.
So there are ways that we can talk about to facilitate that internal motivation. And the motivation and independence, while they are correlated and connected, they're a little bit different as well. You can work on motivation without necessarily working on independence at the same time, you
Hmm.
know. So for the example that you gave with you're struggling with your child getting out of bed, to me, um, what pops into my mind right away is, and this is, you know, if your child has the language skills that you can talk to him about this,
Sure.
or, you know, or for people listening out there, have you asked your child for some ideas as to how to make that struggle easier? You know, like saying, um, so and so, I've noticed that you were having a really hard time in the morning with getting you out of bed, and I don't like starting my mornings that way. I bet you don't like starting your mornings that way either. I'm wondering if you have any ideas as to what could make that easier. And when we ask for our child's ideas or input, then they're going to have more buy-in because they're coming up with a solution. And sometimes it might even surprise you that they would come up with the same solution that you might have suggested. But because they are the ones recommending it, it's like, oh, it's my idea. So that automatically will improve their motivation and their willingness to try it out. So that is one way that you can kind of, for something tricky like getting up out of bed,
Yeah.
or another common struggle is going to bed at night.
Hmm.
I find that I work with that with many families, and what happens is it becomes a power struggle.
Hmm.
And what I teach in my motivation map is whenever you find yourself in a power struggle with your child, once you recognize it, what you need to do is kind of drop it and work on rebuilding your connection with your child. Because the more that you are fighting for the one thing and your child is fighting against it, like that's not going to go anywhere. And when you are able to drop your agenda in that moment and show your child, my connection and my relationship with you is much more important than this thing over here, that's in and of itself is going to make them a little more willing to want to try the things you're asking them to do.
Yeah.
So
And I can
that's
say, just to interrupt you, we see this work with our, like, even our two and like very young. We do potty training, sleep coaching, with both neurotypical and neurodivergent kids, even as young as like 2 and 3, when you ask for their input and you offer them choices and just kind of make them feel part of the decision. And I always tell parents, or we do, it like a power struggle, you know it when you're in it, right? Like you can feel it and
mm-hmm,
everyone's digging in. I always say, like, that's like tug of war, and you're both literally pulling your ends of the rope. So you said drop it, which is funny because I always tell parents, see the rope, drop the rope. It only works if both
step
ends
away
are
from the
being,
rope.
step away from the rope, put it down gently. It only works if you're both pulling. So before you get too much further, like, what if a parent doesn't recognize they're in a power struggle? Like, what does that usually look like, sound like, feel like, where they can go, oh, hold
Mm-hmm,
on, this is a
mm-hmm.
drop it situation?
If you find yourself feeling like, am I in Groundhog's Day? Like I'm having the same argument with my child, like almost word for word every single night, that's a clue that you're probably in a power struggle
Yeah.
because and you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. So if you're and
Right.
that's the thing, when we change our side of the dance, and this is in any relationship with any person, if we change our side of the dance, the other person we are in relationship with has no choice but to change what they're doing in response because we're doing something different. And, you know, I'm not saying that you can't ever return to the thing, like, but Rebecca, it's really important that they get to bed on time. Like, yes, it
Sure.
is. And what I'm suggesting is to drop it temporarily so that you can get into a positive momentum with your child again in at that time of day. and then slowly start to work your way into a solution together. And the more that you can, so that
Mm-hmm.
shared control is what you were just talking about, asking your child for input, giving them choices. The more you can relax into your child having some autonomy, some say, and some shared control, then the easier it will go. So I think the biggest indicator that you're in a power struggle is that you find yourself in the same fight over and over again.
Yeah. And you're just feeling that, like, what I'm saying isn't working.
Yeah, like you're pushing
Yeah.
a
So
big boulder up a hill and going nowhere. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I did this recently. I know I didn't prepare you for this, but let me run you through this brief scenario and you tell me if I did this like the
Yeah,
way you would suggest, right? I know there's no right or
sure.
wrong way, but
No.
our current power struggle is obviously he's almost 14. So being on his phone, which is his only connection to peers. So on one hand, I'm thrilled that he's socializing with peers. He's an only child. He's in virtual school. So he's really trying to connect with people in the outside world, which is great given his diagnosis of autism and social skills deficits. But also it's, sometimes it's just a tool, a ploy to be on the screen longer. So we're trying to have reasonable limits. And it's a huge bone of contention where we'll say like, okay, we've given you a really fair turn on your phone. Now it's time to put it away for a little while and do something else. And that's like, we're going to talk about this in a minute with time blindness, but I'll remind, okay, you're done. Okay, you're done. So the other day I felt that like, and it was headed in the wrong direction. I recognized we were in a power struggle and I don't think he was doing it on purpose. He was just really focused on what he was doing. So I said, okay, this turn needs to end. How many more minutes do you need until you feel like you're finished? And he's picked 5. And I said, great. Find a way to remember when 5 minutes is up, like set a timer for yourself and please come back downstairs, without your phone. So is that what we're talking about? Was that
Did it
dropping
work?
the rope? It did. Well,
Yeah.
he came back. Did it work? I took it as a win. My husband and I slightly disagreed about this, but it was a start. He said, I'll be down at, let's say 12:45. And he came down without anyone saying anything at 12:47.
Okay.
So it did work. I mean, he got an
Yeah.
extra 2 minutes, which again, I don't think was intentional, but it did result in him recognizing that his time was over and being okay with it because he had chosen it and he didn't need another reminder. So I would say it worked. Not as perfectly as if maybe we had just done that from the beginning without all the, but that
Yeah.
was what I said to my husband is like, okay, that wasn't super smooth, but I could see it becoming a smoother strategy in the future if we can remember to just jump to that first.
Sure. Yeah. And also, like when he comes down at 12:47, acknowledging the fact that he got himself down there, like, oh, wow, thank you so much. You said 5 minutes and you're pretty much here on time. Like that really shows me that you are building responsibility with
Which
your
was what I
phone.
did. And that's where my husband disagreed. Hopefully he won't listen to this. He was like, well, aren't you going to talk about the fact that like we had to say it 5 times and then he was 2 minutes past what he said. And I was like, let's just take this as a win. I feel like that will give us a smoother day and he will be
Mm-hmm.
more open to this strategy next time. So
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like for the way he thinks, that was probably the right move.
Yeah, because what happens is if he, in that scenario, he actually did regulate himself enough that he was, and maybe he did turn it off after 5 minutes, and then it took him 2 minutes to like do whatever else he had to do to get himself
Right.
downstairs. But 7 minutes is very, very close to 5 minutes. So I agree, that's a
That's what
win.
I,
But if he then was able to accomplish what he was accountable to his word. And when he comes down, all he gets is flack about the times that he had to be
right.
reminded. He's going to be like, well, why am I going to do this again? Like, it doesn't
That's what I was
matter. I get in
afraid
trouble
of.
either way.
Yeah.
So I think you handled it perfectly. I had a similar situation with a family that they were struggling with bedtime. And it was like a twofold strategy. And first we asked the child, like, what time do you think you would
Mm,
like to go to bed? And it was 30 minutes later than what he was being told he had to go to bed, which wasn't, that terrible in the grand
right.
scheme of things. So I said to the mom, I was like, okay, well, let's run the experiment. Let's see what happens if he goes to bed a half hour later. And we decided that he was going to program his Alexa to remind him because he reads in his room before
Yep.
bed. And the Alexa reminded him. He finished up his reading on his own and initiated saying goodnight to the parents. And it worked like a charm. But the autonomy piece. Like the child
Mhm.
had a say over what time he had to go to bed. He had a say over how it was going to happen, and then it was on him to initiate it. So he felt
Mhm.
the internal drive to do it, because that's where the pride of accomplishment comes in as well.
Which also
Um,
cuts down on resistance, right?
yeah.
Because that's that
Hmm.
intrinsic that you were
Yeah.
talking about. If we're feeling proud, I did it, I feel
Yeah.
good about it, we are more motivated to do it in the future.
Yeah. And he's feeling less controlled. And
Right.
when,
Which is a big
yeah,
deal for teenagers. If you're not there yet, let me
yeah,
tell you.
yeah. And that's the big thing, is like with the power struggle, if the child, and there's a whole other subset of autism too called PDA, which stands for pervasive demand for autonomy, where if they feel like they are being controlled in any way, shape, or form, it literally triggers their nervous system into fight, flight, and freeze. So, like, you really have to be savvy as a parent in how you present things and demand so that
Mm.
it doesn't trigger that. But yeah, the more that you can get your child's feedback and the suggestions and ideas and let them be independent in executing them, even if it's not executed perfectly, I think the more things are going to go smoother.
Awesome. Okay. Well, good to know I'm on the right track. And can you
Yeah.
repeat? So I think PDA used to be stand for pathological demand avoidance. So is this a reframe? What did you say we're calling it
So,
now?
so yes, it's the medical term is pathological demand
Okay.
for, wait, what did I say?
You said pervasive.
Pervasive demand for autonomy.
Yes.
And it's the medical is pathological demand avoidance. Okay. So I prefer the more neurodiversity
Neuro
affirming,
affirming. Okay.
um, acronym, which is, well, actually, the most neurodiversity affirming is persistent demand for autonomy,
Okay.
or
I see how that
persistent
sounds.
drive for autonomy. I think it
That
is
sounds a lot
actually.
nicer. And we're all
Right?
hopefully learning to be neuro affirming. It's an ongoing practice. So thank you. That's why I wanted to circle back on that. I'm like, wait a
Yeah.
minute, my term is outdated, clearly.
Well,
Uh,
pathological demand avoidance, it just sounds like you need to comply
well,
with
and
demand, and you're
pathological,
pathological because you
like
don't.
when I'm a true crime fan. Shout out to my favorite podcast, My Favorite Murder. When I hear pathological, like I think of serial killers and psychopaths. And like, why did we call it that in the first place? That's pretty
Right.
negative.
Yeah.
Um, okay,
Hmm.
awesome. So we're on the right track. So that brings me to my next question. Another big challenge in our home, and maybe this is exclusive to my son, or maybe it's common in kids that share his diagnoses, is time blindness. So when let's say he's on his phone, we'll use that example again, and we go, bud, we really need you to, decide to get off of your phone. And he goes, okay, 1 minute. Then like 5 or 7 minutes goes by. We've already kind of gone through this scenario. I
Hmm.
know in my heart of hearts, he is not trying to be sneaky. He's not manipulating. He literally has no concept of how much time has passed, how long a task might take. Um, he doesn't sort of reverse engineer things the way that I would. If I need to be at X at Y time, I need to start getting, and it takes 10 minutes to get there. I need to leave the house at this time, which means I need to get ready at this time.
Hmm.
It's like we look at the clock and go, oh, I'm supposed to be there right now. And I haven't done any of the things I need to do to get ready, which is
Right.
somewhat age appropriate. But I would love for him to not be an adult with the same challenges, because I know adults who have those challenges and life is not very smooth for them. So whether it's like coming to the dinner table, getting off of their technology, getting overwhelmed because they think homework is going to take 3 hours when it's going to take 30 minutes. What are some strategies parents can use to address this time blindness, if that's even what you would call it? I might be
Hmm.
misframing
Yeah. Yeah. I do.
it.
I would call it that. I agree. Time blindness, time management, deficits, things like that.
Hmm.
Well, when it comes to getting a child off of their phone or their electronic device, that's kind of a whole different ball of wax, because
Sure.
those devices are literally designed to be addictive,
I mean,
So,
we
like,
have trouble even as neurotypical
yeah,
adults.
as adults, exactly. So let's cut the kids some slack a little bit for being addicted to their phones, because that's what the phone people want.
Yes.
But I digress. That's a different podcast. But what I like to suggest, and I learned this technique from Sarah Ward,
Mm.
who owns Cognitive 360 Connections. She's amazing. She's a speech pathologist. But Many people don't have analog clocks in their homes anymore, or if they do, they're for decorative purposes and they
Yes.
might not even be working anymore, right? So kids don't know how to read an analog clock, but an analog clock is the only way to visually show the passage of time.
Right.
So get yourself an analog clock. I know this is an audio podcast, but you're also showing the video. Can I get my analog clock for a moment
Yeah,
so I can show you?
please. I was
Okay, okay.
actually just gonna grab something, but yeah, if you have them, go for it.
Okay. So, like, as you can see,
Remember those from like your elementary school classroom?
yeah, so this is all drawn on by me with dry erase marker.
Right.
And I was using this to teach one of my students the different hour zones. So he was
Yeah.
having a hard time knowing that when the minute hand's getting close to the next hour, it's still like in the same hour. But so
Right.
draw on your clock with dry erase markers. That's what I highly encourage.
Yes.
So, what you can start to do, and if you have a child that's too young and doesn't know how to read a clock, or is older and doesn't know how to read a clock, that's fine too. A trick around that is you can get stickers of items, like something your child's really into. If they're really into sports, get like ball stickers, or if they're really into I want to say Thomas the Train because, but
Yeah.
I'm sure that's like outdated
It,
now. The kids are into
he's
something
still
else, right?
popular, but yeah, I mean, Blippy, let's say Blippy, I don't know.
Yeah. So, and then you just put a different sticker at each
Yeah,
number. And so,
that's
and
great.
then if you can even take apart the insides of the clock and put stickers on the actual hands. So you have a
Okay.
sticker on the minute hand and a sticker on the hour hand. So you could say like, I'm going to just use soccer balls or the balls scenario. So let's say there's a baseball on the minute hand. You can say when the baseball gets to the basketball, it's going to be
Mm,
time for us to go, so that
gotcha.
they can visually see how much time is left. And you can even use the dry erase marker to mark where we are in time. Like, okay,
Right.
we're right here and we have to go when the minute hand hits the 6. So you
Mm-hmm.
have 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes until we
Yep.
have to go. And then they can visually see the minute hand moving through that time. But the other thing that
Yep.
you can start talking about and teaching your child is that 5 minutes before that go time is where you
Mm.
start cleaning up. So you
Ah,
can say,
to sort of,
okay, we
that's where
have
we
to
build
leave
the
when the minute
reverse
hand hits the
engineering.
6. So cleanup
Mm-hmm.
time is when the minute hand hits the 5. Or once
Got
you've
it.
started using that language with your child for a while, you can say, okay, when the minute hand hits the 6, we're going to leave. Tell me your cleanup plan. And then they
Mm.
actually verbalize to you, okay, I'm going to keep playing until the minute hand hits the 4. Maybe they even say the 4, and then I'm going to
Okay.
start cleaning up. Great. That sounds like a good plan. I'll meet you in the kitchen at 6 when the minute hand gets to the 6.
Awesome.
So that they can start, after you kind of teach them how to do it, they can start
Mm-hmm.
managing and planning their time too. Another thing that you can do that helps with the time blindness piece, because I have a family that I work with that they're like, he has no urgency to get out the door. And I was like, that's
Oh yeah.
probably because he doesn't have a good sense of how much he has left to do before he has to leave and how much time those things are going to take, which is where
Right.
that urgency comes from. So he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have that perceived sense of time that's giving that urgency. So if
Right.
you write your schedule on the
Mm-hmm.
clock, like, so let's just say you're writing, okay, here we're having breakfast. And then when here you're going to walk the dog. And then you're going to pack backpack. And then here is time to leave.
Right.
So when your child is going through the routine and they can see what, if the minute hand is here and they still haven't walked the
Mm-hmm.
dog, they can visually see that they're late, that they're behind
That is
schedule.
excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, which can
Now,
help
my
them.
clock, I tried this and the clock I bought
Uh-huh.
on Amazon, it does not erase.
Yes. So
I need to
that's the
try
thing.
again.
You don't buy a clock with a plastic face because the dry erase
That's
markers won't erase well. This one,
That's what happened.
yeah, you need a glass face or a good quality plastic,
Okay,
and
that's why
then
I
it
wanted
will
to point
erase.
that out because I was really frustrated when this didn't work. Um,
Hmm.
but yes, that I really find as parents, I'm a visual person, so that was very helpful to see the different ways that you would use it, and I just like. I don't want this to just be all talking. I want parents to walk away with like, "Ooh, I can buy that. I can do that. We're going to do it today." So that was
Yeah, I
really, really
have a
great.
video too on my Facebook page that
Right.
demonstrates this, so I can give you the link to that
Yes.
too, so
And
people could check it
please
out.
definitely go follow Mindshaper SLP LLC because your social media content is fantastic. I am a
Oh, thank
follower.
you.
So you mentioned in that scenario how you might sort of scaffold, like come down the scaffolding, so to speak, of like, look, I'm going to help you a lot at first. I'm going to show you how this works. But then eventually I might change the language I use as the parent so that you're kind of thinking through, what needs to happen next. So scaffolding is a big buzzword. We talked about this in the last recording, to help a child move from dependence more toward independence, which of course we
Hmm.
all eventually want for our kids. So can you give us one more example? I don't know if we want to pick like the getting ready in the morning routine, or for us, it's always the like all the steps that have to happen in the shower and after the shower routine.
Yeah.
How could we set that up with lots of help? And more importantly, how do we eventually say, like, go do your stuff?
Yeah. So I think a big part of that is parents need to manage their expectations a little
Mm,
better. And because what happens is when we are really proficient at doing a skill or a task, we forget about all of the little things that go
mm,
into actually being independent with that. And
mm,
so when we say, like, I want my child to independently shower, there's so many things that go into
yeah.
showering independently. And when you're talking about a neurodivergent child, maybe there's sensory things that are impacting it. You're talking about executive functioning challenges that might be happening. Maybe the noise of the fan in the bathroom bothers them and it makes it hard for them to keep focused when they're in the shower. So, what I highly suggest is if there's a task that you are really struggling with getting your child to become independent in, is do what I call it, what's called a task analysis. So, you literally sit
Okay.
down and write down all of the steps from start to finish that the child needs to
Hmm.
do to be independent in that task. And by doing
Okay.
that, it's going to bring into your attention all the things that you take for granted as well. Then you want to identify where your child is right now in that step process and where they're able to be independent. Like, okay, he can get undressed and turn the water on completely by himself, but then he kind of falls apart after that, right? Great. So
Right.
now we know what the next step to work on towards independence, and you work on that one next step. When he becomes
Mm,
proficient in that, you add on the next step that comes in the process. And maybe once they've accomplished a couple of steps under their belt, they'll jump a couple steps forward, that totally can happen too. But it becomes less overwhelming for the child when we are really breaking a very robust skill down into individual steps and that
yeah.
they can focus on just accomplishing that one step. And then you build in supports for the remaining steps that you know that they're just not there yet. And
Right.
remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, I mean that's what and this again ties back to the previous episode. The reality, like I hear you on a cognitive level. I'm like, that's awesome. I'm doing that whenever possible. But I also know it takes a lot of preparation on my part. It takes an infinite amount of patience on my part. Like
Mm-hmm.
I get super frustrated that I have a teenage kid who still needs so many reminders about a routine that we've had in place for forever. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But you're also right, like when I was like, let me make a visual list that can hang in the shower in the bathroom, I was like, whoa, this is a lot to fit on this list. And it did help me take that step back of like, I'm really great with executive function. He and I do not share this challenge, which just makes it harder for me to understand like, why is it so hard for you to remember to do? I do like 12 things before I go to bed and I just do them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
But it doesn't work that way for him. And it is a lot of items. And like you said, each item requires a lot of different skills in the executive function arena. So
Right.
I get why that's so challenging. And I'm also
Hmm.
far enough along in our journey with him that I know that when I can take the time and have the patience and build these routines and then slowly peel them back, he does eventually take over on his own. It takes a lot longer than we might be wishing as parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which
Yes.
brings us to what you said. It is definitely a marathon, not a sprint. And I think it's okay to say like, well, I hate that part of this. It's not my
Hmm.
favorite. It's not my favorite part. But it is
Right.
what it is.
Yeah. And you know what? And there's things that feel more urgent than they actually are,
Yes.
like for instance, like let's say your child is really having a tough time with managing after school homework, or at the end of the school day they're just like so spent and burnt that they melt down when they get home,
Oh yeah.
and you really need to take it step by step and really pare down the homework routine or whatever, then, but it feels like, well, I have to get his homework done every night because otherwise he's going to get in trouble and he's going to fail school and he's never going to become an adult and blah, 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 and
I think we
the
call that
snowball.
catastrophizing.
Exactly. So, but we need to catch ourselves when we start thinking like that.
Yes.
And then, reach out to the teacher and be like, listen, this is what's going on at home and this is my plan. Can we come to an agreement that he has like a longer time to turn in his homework because we're trying this to implement this plan at home, and see if
Right.
the teacher will work with you, which takes the pressure off of you a little bit. So
Yeah.
try to get creative and brainstorm ways that will help you take the pressure off of yourself. But no, this needs to be accomplished yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
because most
yes,
times it
I'm
does not.
right. I am famous for catastrophizing all of the
Hmm.
cognitive distortions. I have excellent executive function skills. I also am excellent with cognitive distortions, which I'm
You
less
have an
proud of.
excellent imagination.
I do. So as my son gets to this transitional age, and now I hear all this stuff of like, you need a transition plan and you need to think about his future. And I'm like, holy crap. First of all, we're not even where we need to be like right now. How am I supposed to think about the future? We just got all of our diagnoses. We're still getting supports in place with school. So that's very overwhelming to me, which is what triggers my catastrophizing mentality of like,
Hmm.
how is he ever going to go? How is he going to leave this house? How is he going to function in college if that's what he decides to do, or at a job?
Hmm.
Like we can't even remember to hang the towel after the shower. Although we've gone from leaving it on the floor to tossing it over the door, which again, I'm counting as a win. It still needs to migrate to the hook that is right there so that we can open and close the door. But it's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Um, but we have a lot of time, and I'm trying to remind myself like, you have seen him go from it's on the floor to like, oh wait, I need to hang that so no one slips and mom doesn't get mad and all that stuff. So it'll come. And I've also, like you said, adjusted my expectations. Maybe he's not going to fly the nest at 18 like some other people do. Maybe he's flying the nest at whatever, 20, 23. I don't know, but it can still
Right.
happen. It's just a matter of like you said, adjusting your expectations, managing
Right.
the catastrophizing,
Hmm.
to
And yeah, and
hopefully get
maybe it's okay for you to take a couple of years after high school and get him kind of in a more stable place before he takes on the challenge of college or the workforce or whatever it is.
right.
That's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Wonderful. This is really helpful. I always say, like, I'm doing this show for everyone else, but I'm sure getting a lot out of it
Oh,
myself too.
good.
So it is also a little bit for me. So let's apply these strategies a little bit to social interactions, which
Hmm.
is another very common challenge with neurodiversity, or I imagine with children who are maybe delayed in speech. Um,
Hmm.
what strategies are you finding to be successful to help kids there? For
Hmm.
example, I make that my son order his own food at the restaurant. He'll kind of
Hmm.
look at me like, go. I'm like, yep, go ahead. You know what you want. Go ahead. It's just, I can tell it's physically painful for him. And I'm assuming that's because it requires working memory. So he's instantly anxious. He's going to forget his order. It requires eye contact, which in general is not his sustain. He'll make eye contact, but sustaining it is difficult. And with strangers, forget about it. And he's the center of attention at the table. In his mind, he's the center of attention in that moment, right? So I guess it's all of that.
Hmm.
If parents are struggling in that area or making a phone call or whatever,
Hmm.
what would you say to those parents? So many challenges.
Yeah. So, again, it's about what I also teach is there's two foundational independent philosophies that you need to know. And one is you cannot have independence without autonomy, which is kind of what we talked about with getting your
Mm,
child's opinions and ideas and suggestions on things. And the
yeah.
other one is independence does not mean without supports.
Okay.
So, like, and that was kind of like a light bulb moment that I had when I was reading one of the books from my book club that I host. And there was an excerpt by a non speaking autistic man, and he talks about how he has support workers and he tells them that they need to let him make mistakes,
Mm,
but he is independent for him despite the fact that he has to use a communication device for communication, and he still has support workers that have to help him function throughout the day, but that's still considered independence.
yeah.
So when you go out to eat, can you bring a little notepad to keep in your purse so that you can talk about what your son wants to order and write it down so that when it comes, he can just read his order? And maybe he can, like, having the paper to look at rather than having to recall it from his memory would feel a little less anxiety provoking, and it gives him a reason to not have to stare at the waitress the whole time that he's
Yeah.
making the order. So, and then if he's able to do it, he's independent with ordering his meal. He just needs that support of having it written out first, and that's fine.
Yeah. And
Or
he
you could use
actually
the
came
notes
up
app
with
on
a
your phone.
win. Yes, that's what I was going to say. He came up with a win on his own. I don't remember the exact details, but we were at El Limon. Shout out to El Limon. It's one of our favorite Mexican places. They're all over the place. And he was panicking, of course, because he told me what he wanted. And I said, okay, great. I'm glad you decided. I really want you, when it's your turn, I want you to tell the person what you want. And he started to freak out. And before I even fortunately, somehow I didn't rescue or offer a solution. I'm not sure how that happened. He said, I'm going to put it in my phone so I don't forget it. And then he did exactly what you just said. He read it from his phone when the person came. And that just made him so much more at ease. He still didn't love having to do it, but he wasn't quite as
Yeah.
panicked. And he did
Yeah.
it. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, that was great. Like maybe that's what you can do next time so you don't have to be so worried. And I was like, it's those little moments. I was blown away of like, look,
Mm-hmm.
he can come up with ideas. And maybe
Yeah.
sometimes I don't give him enough of a chance to do that. But it also was like, hey, the stuff we're doing, even if you don't see it paying off in the area, maybe the after bathroom routine, everything's still on the floor, but maybe the stuff we've been doing and talking about there translated to that moment where he was like, how
Mm-hmm.
can I help myself in this situation? And it was really
Yeah.
exciting. It was the smallest thing and it was so exciting.
Yeah, that is awesome that he came up with that. And one of the big indicators of adult success is advocacy skills.
Yeah.
So the more that when you are implementing a support for your child, the more that you can explain to them the why you're giving them that support, the more that they're going to be able to understand. Like if it's a sensory strategy, like, oh, I think your body seems a little wiggly right now, so I'm going to give you some deep pressure because that usually helps your body calm down. You're teaching them, oh, when my body feels like this, deep pressure helps me feel calm, so that they can advocate for themselves, hopefully down the road, and saying like, oh, my body feels wiggly, I need something that gives me deep pressure. um so that's just an example, but
Yeah.
your son kind of advocated for himself in that moment, saying, you know what,
Yeah.
I'm going to write this down because that's what I need to be successful in this moment.
Yeah.
So that's a big part with the social piece, is teaching your child to understand what their needs are so that they can communicate those needs to others. Because when a person is able to advocate and communicate their needs to others, other people are much more compassionate and willing to
Mm-hmm.
support and assist them. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing is get your kids involved in activities that they're super interested in and super passionate about, because they're going to find other people there that are also super interested and passionate about that thing. And it's going to be really easy for them to communicate and converse with the other people there because they have a common interest. And
And we know how
rather
much
than,
they love to talk and talk and talk and talk about their whatever they're passionate about in that
exactly.
moment.
Right. And that's a big thing in the neurodiversity movement. Like the fact of, so info dumping is actually a form of autistic communication that shows a person that, hey, I really like you and I care about you so much that I'm going to share my deepest passions with you. Whereas neurotypically, that isn't a social norm. We don't info dump on people like that. So traditionally, we have tried to divert autistic communication so that they are talking about a wider array of topics. But it's more neurodiversity affirming to put your child in a position where they can talk as much as they want about their favorite topic because they have other people that are also interested and want to hear about it and talk about it too. So that's going to go really far and do wonders for your child's confidence and social communication skills when they feel successful interacting with other people.
Yep. And repeat that phrase you said. I just want to underscore it. I think it was, you can't have independence without
You
autonomy.
can't have independence without autonomy.
Yeah. Because I feel like there's this constant push with parents of like, I just want them to be independent. But then we're like micromanaging everything for them and making all the decisions and rescuing them. And so we're kind of like,
Especially a special needs child. Yes.
right? So we're like working
Mm-hmm.
against ourselves and our own goals for them, which is, we kind of have to take a step back and think about that. So there is no independence
With loving
without
kindness to
autonomy. Yes,
yourself. Don't beat yourself
absolutely.
up saying, oh, it's my fault. My child's not independent. I'm micromanaging. Like, no, you did what you had to do to get your child to this point where
Yeah,
they are, and you can lovingly find ways to micromanage less without
yeah,
beating yourself up.
right. Yes, thank you for clarifying that because I need to hear that too.
Yeah,
Last
we all
question.
do.
Can you come live with us until we get
Aw.
reach the point of independence? No, you have
Well,
too many
my husband
performances.
will be away for a few days.
Right? I mean, can we hire you out? Because this all sounds amazing. I could listen to you forever. We'll definitely have you back. That gave me a great idea. I think we need to dig into that whole neuroaffirming thing. It's, very popular right now. And obviously, I don't, popular is not the right word, very important to be informed about and to be careful with how we view things and what we say. So maybe we can have you back to talk about that a little bit more. But lastly, for today, what is one more thing that you have learned on this support journey that we haven't touched on yet that you want other parents to hear or know right now,
Hmm.
today?
Well, it's one thing with three parts.
Okay, that's
So,
allowed. I give you permission.
yes, if you take nothing away from this podcast, and I said the same thing in my workshop that I hosted recently, take this away. Stop prompting your child so much, pause more, and use declarative language.
Mm,
So, so often I see in situations where, and I do virtual sessions with my students where I'll ask my student a question or I'll say something to my student. And before the student even has a chance really to take it in and process it, the adult that's with them, whether it's a support worker or a parent, is repeating the words that I said to the child. Stop doing that, because when you do that, you are teaching your child to only respond to you, that everything is going to be filtered through you and they will only respond to you.
right.
Instead, you're going to pause and give your child space to process what was said and think about what needs to be said so that when they do respond, it's a novel response for them. It's genuine and novel. And if they do need a little more support, you can make a statement using declarative language. So declarative language, we could do a whole other podcast on that.
I actually wrote it down. We're going to do one on that
Okay.
too.
Okay, good. I love talking about declarative language. But
But
the
yes, I was
short,
going to ask you to provide an example because a lot of
yeah,
people maybe
short
haven't
and
heard that.
simple is declarative language. So there's two types of language. There's imperative language, which is giving directions, and asking questions you already know the answers to, which we do all the time to our kids, right? Declarative language is just making comments or statements.
Hmm.
So instead of saying in that situation where I say something to my student and they don't respond, instead of repeating what I said or saying, what did she say? Or what do you blah, blah, blah? You could say something like, oh, I think maybe they need to hear that again, Miss Rebecca. Or,
Hmm.
oh, Miss Rebecca's talking to you. I think maybe you need to hear what she said again. And so I'm making statements, and usually they're in the form with I statements. And there's
Hmm.
so many benefits to this. In one, your child then has to problem solve what to do in the situation because you're not telling them what to do and you're not asking them a question with a definitive answer. They then will come up with their own response. And they're also, when you use I language, you're also improving their perspective taking abilities because they have to think
Hmm.
about your perspective to know how to respond.
Which could also be a whole nother episode.
Yes, exactly. So, but definitely try to, it's okay to let your child make mistakes. Try to pause more, prompt less, and use statements and comments to talk to your child more than questions and directions. Because when you only talk to your child in questions and directions, you're teaching them to be a direction follower,
Hmm.
not a problem solver. And when you use declarative language, you're teaching them to be more of a problem solver and to improve their flexibility of thought.
That's excellent. Thank you. I'm
Yes.
super proud of this episode. All that information is so helpful, and I
Oh,
appreciate
good.
you. I'll speak for the audience. We all appreciate you. So there's a lot
Thank
more we can
you.
talk about, and I'll try to have you back soon. Thank you
I
so
love
much for
that.
joining me. Good luck with your performance.
Thank
Oh,
you.
the book club. Did you want to touch on where can people find you? What's this book club all about? When's the next motivation map workshop? Anything you want to tell people, knowing this will be coming out down the road?
Yeah. So the next motivation map workshop is to be determined, but it will be sometime this spring. And it's a
Okay.
three-part workshop series. The first workshop is Stop the Drama. And
Hmm.
we learn how to overcome anxiety and overwhelm with your child. And workshop 2 is Stop the Bribes, where we talk about how to increase internal motivation. And workshop 3 is Stop the Nagging, which focuses on strategies to increase independence. That will be coming up in the spring. If you follow me on social media at MindShaper SLP on Facebook and Instagram, I'm actually going to be amping up my YouTube channel pretty soon, which
Awesome.
again is still at MindShaper SLP. So follow me there and you'll definitely be in the loop for when I do the motivation map workshop. Right now it is the middle of February and we are just about to start a new book in my book club. I host a book club for parents, an autism book club for parents and professionals called Rebecca's Awesome Read, spelled AUSOME.
Perfect.
And we are starting a book this week called Different Not Less by Chloe Hayden, who is an autistic author. We focus on books that educate us on the neurodiversity affirming movement. And we try to do books by autistic authors as much as possible. We just finished our first fiction book that was written by a non-speaking autistic author and was amazing. I learned so much. So you can get on that list by going to Rebecca Robbins, Robbins has two B's, slp.com / awesome reads, and that's AUSOMEREADS.
Excellent. And I'll put that all in the description of this episode as well. Thank you so much. Listeners, watchers, I'll be back soon with more stuff that I wish I knew sooner, and our experts and our parents wish that they knew sooner as well and want you to know. In the meantime, I'll leave you with my updated list of stuff that I have learned the hardest way. The new list is your to-do list will always be there, so put yourself on it. You can't pour from an empty cup. Schedule ways to refill yours each day. And there is no way to be a perfect parent, countless ways to be a really good one. So let's just aim for that. And I will be back soon. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.